Let's be completely real. Wealth isn't just about what we do. Yeah, realistically, sometimes it does start with luck. Being born into a wealthy family, for example, or having early opportunities can really change the playing field. It's life, is what it is. But even then, research shows that the way we think, decide, and follow through is still potentially what determines whether we build wealth or not. So whether it's protected or lost. So that's where wiring, our habits, identity, and mindset comes in. Psychologists have basically found that our self-identity shapes behavior more consistently than willpower or short-term motivation. If our mind sees being good with money as part of who we are, our choices naturally align with that belief. And that leads nicely into point number 1, which is identity before income. Becoming the kind of person who handles money well. So neuroscience shows that identity-based habits are basically reinforced through neurons that fire together, wire together. That's basically the concept. So every time we act in line with our identity, those neural pathways basically strengthen. So over time, it takes less mental effort to repeat the behavior. So here's the twist. Many of us try to change our finances by focusing only on actions. So we make a budget, right? We try to spend less. But if our identity still feels like someone who's basically bad with money, those changes rarely stick. So instead, we can start with small identity anchoring actions. For example, not saying, oh, I'm trying to save, but saying something along the lines of, actually, I'm the kind of person who plans ahead. Not, oh, I hope I can invest, but actually, I'm the kind of person who builds wealth over time. So for instance, imagine 2 people given an extra £500, right? One sees themselves as a spender who deserves a treat. The other sees themselves as an investor who likes to grow money. The exact same £500 is handled completely differently, not because of knowledge, no, but because of identity. So for some, identity shifts can be paired with prayer. Asking God for wisdom, discipline, and stewardship over resources connects the change to a deeper purpose. When we change the way we see ourselves, the way we act with money starts to follow, basically almost automatically. Okay, so surprising fact, money stress isn't always just about the numbers, right? Sometimes it's also about the biology too. Let me unpack. So neuroscience shows that when we feel financial pressure, the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detector, basically sends signals through the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal. That was a long word to say. But basically the HPA axis releases cortisol and adrenaline. This is the same fight or flight system that reacts to physical danger. So pretty much in short bursts, this can sharpen focus. But if that stress stays on for days or weeks or forever how long, right? High cortisol basically reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain we need for planning and problem solving and also making rational decisions. So here's the twist. When the brain is in scarcity mode, it actually narrows attention to the most immediate threat. So we focus on surviving, right, the moment instead of creating a strategy for the future. The one way to basically break that cycle is to use a quick physical reset before making a money decision, for example. Evidence from cognitive neuroscience basically shows that really grounding basic techniques, for example, like standing up or shaking out our arms or like splashing cold water on our face, actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which pretty much lowers our arousal. So the prefrontal cortex can actually just re-engage again. In a real life situation, so let's say before responding to an unexpected bill, right? You could take like 60 seconds to just reset, step away from the email or the letter, whatever it is, stand up straight, roll your shoulders back and just breathe. Honestly, then return to the problem with a brain that's more wired for strategy rather than panic. So ultimately, wealth building isn't just about knowing what to do. It's about making those decisions from a calm, strategic state. When we interrupt the scarcity alarm, we give the brain the conditions it needs to choose well. Next, we can actually just rewrite our money story. We can name it, reframe it, choose a better frame. Research suggests that the beliefs we hold about money often is actually learned in childhood, which makes sense. So it acts more like a mental script guiding our financial behavior without us realizing it. And that is so true. I remember when I was younger, I never really knew much about investing. I always thought save. It's not now I'm realizing actually like you can't save your way to wealth. If those scripts are, for example, negative or limiting, like I just described, they can really keep us stuck even when our income grows. The cognitive reappraisal, which is a process in cognitive behavioral theory, which basically shows that changing the meaning meaning we attach to a situation changes our emotional and behavioral response. So for instance, we can name it, right? We can identify that script. So it could be, okay, money is hard to keep, or I'm just bad with finances. So studies actually show that naming a belief activates the prefrontal cortex and reduces emotional reactivity in the amygdala. Okay, so next we can reframe it. So ask, is this always true, for example, and then replace it with I'm bad with money with actually I'm learning to manage money well. This just opens the brain to new strategies, which is so helpful. And then finally, you could choose a better frame, right? So decide how you want to actually think about money moving forward. So you could frame it as a tool for security, opportunity, and impact, not just survival. Okay, so here's the surprising part. Studies actually indicate that when we reframe, it doesn't just shift our mindset, it physically changes neuroactivity, strengthening the circuits involved in long-term decision making. Okay, so let's dive deeper with another example. So for instance, someone raised hearing, oh, money causes problems, might unconsciously avoid wealth building opportunities. So by reframing it as actually money allows me to solve problems, decisions start to shift towards growth instead of avoidance. Pretty much the concept of what I'm saying here is that wealth often starts with our thought patterns. So if we change the story, our actions start to follow. So next, behavioral science shows that when cortisol is high, we're more likely to make impulsive financial decisions, overspending to cashing out our investments too early, which we weren't meant to touch for like another 10 years. The HPA axis controls cortisol release, right? So when it's overactivated, the brain prioritizes short-term relief over long-term gain. One of the fastest ways to lower cortisol is controlled breathing. Clinical studies support this. So for example, breathing like 5 to 6 seconds in and then 5 to 6 seconds out basically just inhibits the HPA axis and reduces stress hormone levels. And another study even found that just 10 minutes of slow breathing a day reduced cortisol by up to 18% in 1 week. So that's faster than many lifestyle interventions take months to achieve. So before making a big financial choice, you could set a timer for 2 minutes, right? Sit comfortably, breathe in for those 5 seconds, and then breathe out for another 5 seconds. Let the exhale basically feel like it's releasing tension. And by the end, the brain should be primed for logic instead of fear. So ultimately, the goal isn't just to feel calm, it's to create the biological state where the smartest money decisions can happen or can come from. Okay, so when financial goals are misaligned with our core values, our motivation can fade, for example, even if the goal is objectively good, right? So this is linked to the self-determination theory. I think you've heard this so many times in my videos, but it basically shows that goals feel more rewarding when they meet our need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. From a neuroscience perspective, value congruent goals basically activates the brain's ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is an area linked to emotional meaning and decision making. When this region is engaged, the brain's reward system processes the goal as more personal, right? Or more personally significant, increasing our persistence. But here's the challenge. Many of us set money goals based on what others expect. So a certain salary by 30 or a house in a specific area, a car, that signals success. But without deeper alignment, these goals can just drain us rather than energize us. So imagine saving for a luxury car, but because that's what you think success looks like, right? But your real value is freedom to travel. So every payment on the car just feels heavy because it's like, actually, it's pulling me away from, like our true priority. What we could do is list out our top 5 personal values, then write down our main money goal, for example. Does it directly support one of our goals or one of our values? If not, it may need reshaping, and that's completely fine. That is what life is about. For those of us who bring faith into financial planning, prayer can be a filter, right? Asking God for clarity can really help cut out through cultural noise and point towards what's truly worth pursuing. So it's not about removing ambition, absolutely not. It's more about anchoring ambition in what matters the most. So when goals match our values, saving feels purposeful, spending feels intentional, and you know what? The brain sees progress as deeply satisfying, not just another task to tick off. Delaying a purchase decision, even by minutes, right, has been shown to really significantly reduce the likelihood of buying. So this is basically because impulse buying is driven by the brain's mesolimbic dopamine system, yeah, I said it, which spikes when we anticipate a reward. So if we create a pause, the spike naturally falls. So the 10-10-10 rule is a simple but powerful version of this. So before making a purchase, ask, hold on, how will this feel in 10 minutes? minutes, 10 months, or even 10 years from now. And let's be honest, that's actually a bit extreme to do for every purchase. So maybe just one where it's like a lot that you're about to spend on. But basically the time frame it activates the hippocampus memory and prefrontal cortex planning. So pulling the decision away from pure rewards, anticipation, into more long-term thinking basically just helps overall. Okay, so let's look at this from a real life perspective. Say you're about to spend £1,000 on a designer bag on impulse, right? In 10 minutes, it'll feel exciting. In 10 months, it might be, worn a handful of times. In 10 years, that £1,000 could have compounded into a lot more. This reframe shifts the emotional balance from short-term thrill to long-term gain. So this basically works because it uses temporal discounting against itself. So temporal discounting is our brain's bias to value immediate rewards more than future ones. So by deliberately walking our thoughts forward in time, we give future benefits more weight in the decision process. So even a short pause changes the chemistry of decision making. We're no longer just reacting to a dopamine surge anymore. We're engaging the neural circuits for strategy and foresight and just future planning. And over time, guess what? That's the difference between wealth that basically just leaks away and wealth that compounds. Let's talk about delayed gratification, training the brain to wait. One powerful insight is that behavioral science has shown that wealth often grows in the space between earning and spending. So that space is where delayed gratification lives. And while it sounds simple, the ability to wait for a bigger reward is one of the strongest predictors of financial resilience. So in the brain, this comes down to a balance between the prefrontal cortex, our planning center, and the ventral striatum, which basically lights up for immediate rewards. When the ventral striatum dominates, we chase the quick win, right? But when the prefrontal cortex steps in, we can basically pause and aim for something greater. And you know what the good news? Delayed gratification isn't fixed. And neuroscience shows it's pretty much trainable through small, consistent challenges that strengthen prefrontal control. So the next time we may be tempted for that sale, instead of clicking buy now, we can just wait a bit, have a bit of a delay. And during that time, we can kind of visualize what else can that money be used for. So from adding to an investment account to funding a trip, it could be used for something a bit more aligned to your goals. So let's talk about cognitive reframing and turning setbacks into leverage. So let's really unpack this. Psychologists have found that how we frame a financial setback can really influence whether it becomes a long-term block or a short-term lesson. So this is known as cognitive reappraisal. So it's a strategy where we reinterpret an event to change its emotional impact. So in the brain, reappraisal basically engages the prefrontal cortex to regulate the amygdala's emotional signals. So that means the thinking brain basically steps in to calm the reactive brain. So imagine losing money on a risky investment, right? And instead of framing it as proof of failure, we frame it as paid tuition. It's a lesson, right, in a market risk that will basically inform smart choices next time, hopefully. So one study found that people who practiced reappraisal 3 times a week basically reported 23% less financial stress after 1 month. So this doesn't mean ignoring the loss, absolutely not. It means anchoring to the meaning that moves us forward. So a setback reframed as data becomes leverage, right, for future strategy. And that's the shift that changes everything. And that links amazingly to the next point, which is the compounding effect of micro decisions. So in behavioral science, that small repeated financial actions can actually snowball into some significant outcomes. So both positive and negative. And in the brain, habits form through, the saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So each time we make a consistent choice, whether it's saving £5 or overspending on a daily treat, we're basically reinforcing neural pathways that make that behavior easier to repeat. So for an example, let's use an example. If we automatically round up purchases and deposit the change into savings over a year, like those tiny amounts basically accumulate to something. And the reverse is also true. So if we have like our daily indulgence of whatever we want to indulge in, over the year, that could easily add up to like £1,000 annually spent on whatever we was consuming daily. So a 2020 study basically found that participants who set up micro automations like roundups or daily £1 transfers basically increase saving rate. This is why tracking small choices matter. Like they don't feel significant in the moment, but over time, they're basically the building building blocks of financial stability. But in saying that, I know how hard it is because I definitely have a daily spend on something that I don't need, but it's life. While psychology and neuroscience give us tools for building wealth, faith offers that deeper anchor for why we build it, in my opinion. So for those of us who believe financial stewardship is more than accumulation, it's about using our resources wisely to serve others and honor God. So from a cognitive science view, having a higher purpose basically shapes long-term decisions by activating the brain's value-based networks, including the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So when wealth goals are tied to purpose, they become more resilient to short-term temptations. So let's say part of our vision for our wealth is to support a charity or fund a mission. That purpose can make it easier to decline like unnecessary spending, not out of restriction, absolutely not, but more out of alignment with something bigger. And I think I've said this in one of my videos before, but the research basically shows that people with more purpose-driven financial goals are more likely to maintain savings through economic downturns or hardship. So ultimately, the smartest financial strategies work best when they're grounded in both wisdom and intention. And faith can provide the why that sustains the how, turning money from just a resource into a tool for lasting impact. If you enjoyed this video, check out these other videos and I will see you in my next video. That's a lot of videos. Okay, bye.